Number 10. Marta Elena Vento. After moving from Spain to England, 27-year-old Marta Elena Vento took a job as an overnight desk clerk at a Travelodge hotel in Dorset. She was working alone one night in 2020 when a guest, later identified as 32-year-old Stephen Cole, brutally attacked her with a pair of scissors and bludgeoned her to death. The hotel's manager arrived at work a few hours later to discover the gruesome scene. A guest who encountered the carnage described seeing Marta's lifeless body crumpled in a corner near the reception desk and said that the walls and floor were soaked in blood. That same day, Cole entered a local police station and immediately confessed to the murder. He told the officers on duty that he hadn't got any sleep, but authorities would later learn that his problems ran much deeper than sleep deprivation. According to a court-appointed psychiatrist, Cole suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was in the throes of a psychotic episode marked by delusions and hallucinations at the time of the murder. He apparently got the impulse to attack Marta because he disliked the way she smiled at him when they crossed paths that morning. Just days earlier, he had been kicked out of a different hotel for attacking guests. Cole had several prior convictions under his belt by then, including an assault against his own mother. And he had been released from prison just 2 months earlier, which meant that he was under the supervision of an offender management team. His overseers noticed that he was becoming agitated in the days leading up to Marta's murder, and they were allegedly aware that Cole had stopped taking his medication. But they apparently didn't realize just how dangerous he was to society and failed to take action to keep the public safe. Both the prosecution and the defense agreed that Cole was profoundly mentally ill and that Marta's murder was the product of a systemic failure rather than the defendant's personal wrongdoing. Cole pleaded guilty to manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility and was institutionalized indefinitely under Britain's Mental Health Act. At his sentencing, Judge Angela Morris echoed the sentiments of the attorneys, describing the murder as a tragic and appalling incident. In a victim impact statement, Marta's father said that the family suffered from infinite pain after losing her. He called for every person responsible for his daughter's death to be held accountable and brought to justice, although it was unclear who he blamed specifically for the murder. During an inquest into Marta's death in early 2023, senior coroner Rachel Griffin criticized what she described as a lack of scrutiny over the circumstances of the case, which is now under further investigation. Number 9. Jordan Hightower. 31-year-old Jordan Hightower was working the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store in Arlington, Texas in early 2021 when he was senselessly shot dead during a robbery. The killer, 18-year-old Dorian Woodard, entered the store at around 1:30 in the morning and waited until all the other customers left. He then fired at Hightower multiple times during the botched burglary. According to authorities, Hightower wasn't even given a chance to comply with Woodard before he started shooting. The suspect then tried to open the register but was unable to, so he stuffed some merchandise into a backpack and fled on foot. 2 customers walked in afterward and saw Hightower injured and suffering, but they didn't seek help. They later told police that they thought he had just gotten into a fist fight and didn't want to get involved. By the time a customer walked in and dialed 911, an hour and a half had passed since the shooting. Woodard bragged about the murder afterward, while he went on the run for 4 days. Police caught up with Woodard right as he was leaving his father's apartment to catch an Uber out of town. Sadly, his decision to take someone's life inadvertently came with the added effect of ruining his own life. A jury convicted Woodard of capital murder in 2022, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He was also fined $10,000 for the crime. Number 8. Kerry Brown and Laurie Jones. 26-year-old beauty queen Kerry Brown was on her way home from working a night shift as a nurse in Ireland when she got into a tragic car accident in 2019. She had recently moved back to Ireland from England and was working at Kerry University Hospital when her car collided with a Jeep during her drive home. Paramedics rushed to the scene and tried to save Brown. Sadly, there was nothing they could do, and the young woman was pronounced dead at the scene. In addition to being known as a fantastic nurse with a heart of gold, Kerry was a finalist in the London Rose of Tralee beauty pageant in 2016. The fatal crash came just hours after another nurse, 23-year-old Laurie Jones, died in a car accident on her way home from working a night shift in South Wales. She was last seen leaving her workplace in her scrubs and was missing for a day before her body was found in the Sahawi River outside Cardiff. Laurie's family had become concerned for her well-being when she failed to arrive home that morning. Sadly, she was found dead inside her car, just a mile away from her house. Number 7. Curtis Pishin. After having his career as a police officer cut short by multiple sclerosis, 40-year-old Curtis Pishin took a job as a nighttime security guard at a manufacturing plant in Seabrook, New Hampshire. A few hours into his shift on the 4th of July in 2000, his car mysteriously caught fire. He called the local fire department at 1:42 a.m. and responding firefighters got the blaze under control, but failed to determine the cause of the fire. They also noticed that Pishin seemed unusually calm for someone whose vehicle had just inexplicably burst into flames. Pishin's supervisor checked on him at his station at around 3:20 a.m., but less than half an hour later, one of his co-workers noticed that he had vanished. Because Pishin had a history of depression, investigators initially speculated that he may have suffered a mental breakdown triggered by his car catching fire, and that perhaps he disappeared on his own accord. But a witness reported seeing two cars speeding away from the plant at around the same time Pishin's colleagues realized he was missing, and police later discovered that someone had used a forklift to break into some vending and change machines on the property that night. No trace of Pishin was ever found. His cigarettes, lighter, and lunch were left at his workplace. His bank activity stopped completely, and his apartment remained untouched. He was declared legally dead in 2008, but his loved ones still long for closure and to know what happened to him that night. At this point, authorities believe foul play was involved, but they seem no closer to solving the case than they were more than 20 years ago. Number 6. Tina Milford. 23-year-old Tina Milford was abducted from a Lil Cricket convenience store in Anderson, South Carolina, while working the graveyard shift in 1983. She had asked to switch to days after being robbed and beaten during her shift several months earlier, and it was her final overnight. Tina was last seen alive at the store at around 1:30 in the morning. Around 2:45 a.m., a customer came in to buy coffee and noticed that she was missing, but that her shoes, purse, and other belongings were still at the store. It wasn't unusual for Tina to remove her shoes at work, but it was out of character for her to disappear in the middle of a shift without taking her things with her. Later that morning, a group of people discovered Tina's lifeless body while collecting cans along a dirt path about 12 miles, 19.3 kilometers away from the convenience store. She was partially undressed and had been shot in the head. Investigators worked tirelessly to try identifying the young woman's killer, but the case went cold. In 2018, law enforcement revealed that they had obtained a DNA sample from a piece of Tina's clothing, but they hesitated to go into further detail because they didn't want to jeopardize the case. That same year, Anderson County Coroner Greg Shaw told the Independent Mail that he believed Tina willingly got into the vehicle of someone she knew, thinking that she would sit and talk for a few minutes, and totally unaware that she was about to be kidnapped. Shaw wasn't the coroner when Tina was murdered, but he spent years poring over thousands of documents, following up on leads, and trying to solve the case. At the time of her murder, Tina was in the final stages of divorcing the father of her 18-month-old baby. Tony Milford reportedly told detectives that he and Tina were attempting to reconcile, but Tina's sister, Anne Hollingsworth, and other people disputed the claim. Speaking with the Independent Mail in 2018, Hollingsworth said that she believes Tony may know something about Tina's murder, but he was never charged in connection with the case, and he refused to take a polygraph after consulting with a lawyer. The case remains unsolved, despite the seemingly promising DNA evidence. Number 5. Deborah Poe. 26-year-old Deborah Poe was a hard-working woman with 2 full-time jobs. One of them was at a Circle K convenience store in Orlando, where she worked the graveyard shift 5 nights a week. It wasn't unusual for drunk and creepy customers to harass her, but the problem escalated when a naked man tried climbing over the counter and chased her around the store. Deborah's boyfriend, Scott Iaggi, began checking on her as often as possible throughout her shifts, but it sadly wasn't enough to protect her from the predator who abducted her during the early morning hours a few weeks later in 1990. Iaggi had stopped at the store at around 1 o'clock in the morning, and Deborah was fine. At around 3 o'clock a.m., a friend drove past the gas station and saw her behind the counter. Just 15 to 30 minutes later, however, a customer entered the store to buy cigarettes and encountered a man with long dark hair standing behind the counter. He seemed unfamiliar with the store's cigarette selection, but managed to operate the cash register without any issues. There was no sign of Deborah, and she hasn't been seen since. Her work smock was found neatly folded in the counter, and her car was in the parking lot. Authorities never identified the man behind the counter, and they don't necessarily believe he was involved in Deborah's disappearance. But they're still interested in speaking with him in case he knows any information pertinent to the case. It's been more than 30 years, and all they have to go on is a composite sketch drawn from the customer's memory and a description of his appearance and vehicle. He was dressed like a metalhead, wearing a Megadeth t-shirt, a black earring shaped like a cross, and a skull ring. And he was believed to be the owner of a black van with a Megadeth mural airbrushed onto the side. Police are hoping that someone comes forward and helps to identify the man. Iaggi passed a polygraph and was ruled out as a suspect, and the naked man who chased Deborah at her workplace was never identified. In 2002, authorities said they had identified a suspect in the case but refused to publicly name the individual. Around the same time, they searched some land near a church where Iaggi was once a pastor. It's unclear whether the person they refused to name is still a suspect. Number 4. Stephen Chidawa. After finishing an overnight shift at a hospital in Leeds, England in 2022, 45-year-old social worker Stephen Chidawa went home, took a shower and went to bed. A few hours later, his wife Stacey found him unresponsive and realized he wasn't just asleep. Paramedics rushed to the scene, where they spent 45 minutes trying to revive Chidawa, before concluding that they couldn't save him. An autopsy found that Chidawa had a fatal amount of alcohol in his system, roughly 5 times the legal limit for driving, according to a toxicology test. But Stacey insisted that he didn't seem drunk when he arrived home that morning. He also didn't smell of booze, and there were no indicators that he had been drinking. No empty bottles, no strange behavior, nothing. Chidawa wasn't a daily drinker, and after being married to him for 15 years, Stacey could instantly tell if he had been drinking. She would have known if he was intoxicated or trying to hide a secret habit, because he would have been acting noticeably out of character. There was also no mention of suspected alcohol use in the reports taken by responding paramedics. It would be extremely unusual for EMTs to notice signs of drinking and not take note of it. The autopsy also found traces of heavy narcotic sedatives in Chidawa's system, only adding to the mystery surrounding his death. Following an inquest, senior coroner Kevin McLaughlin admitted that the case had left him and his colleagues stumped. He said that the amount of alcohol in Chidawa's body was one of the highest levels he had ever seen, but conceded that the evidence, or lack thereof rather, failed to explain how the respected hospital worker got so much alcohol into his system to begin with. Unfortunately, the inquest failed to procure the answers that Chidawa's family, friends, and co-workers had hoped for. Number 3. Lee Shepherd. New Zealand national Lee Shepherd was ecstatic to learn that he was going to be a father in 2003. He was looking forward to the future, so when he vanished from his workplace in North London just 5 nights later, his loved ones immediately knew that he didn't purposely disappear. Shepherd clocked in for the night shift at a metal recycling plant, but he never clocked out, and his bank activity stopped completely. Based on surveillance footage, it appeared as though he never left the building, yet he was nowhere to be found, leading investigators to suspect that he somehow snuck away from the property or met with foul play without being seen on camera. Police concluded that Shepherd was last seen after 2 o'clock in the morning by a Ukrainian co-worker named Dmytro Oliferenko. Due to his immigration status, Oliverenko was reluctant to speak to detectives, and he offered little in the way of helpful information. 5 years later, Shepard's family hired a private investigator who persuaded police to revisit the case file. With no forensic evidence to indicate what became of the missing father-to-be, the entirely circumstantial case went before a panel of jurors at the North London Coroner's Court. After reviewing the evidence, they concluded that Shepard was crushed to death by a 44-ton, 40 metric tons machine that was capable of crushing 10 refrigerators at once. As part of the inquest, police re-interviewed Oliverenko. He was a lot more forthcoming the second time around and revealed that the fridge crusher had malfunctioned on the night of Shepard's disappearance. Shortly after Shepard was last seen, the machine experienced an unexplained blockage in its chamber. Oliverenko admitted that he and his co-workers suspected that Shepard had been crushed and that none of them wanted to look inside the crusher to see what was causing the blockage. He gave conflicting stories about whether it was possible or realistic for an employee to have an accident while working on the machine, but after considering the circumstances, the jury felt comfortable ruling that Shepard met his demise under the fridge crusher's weight. After years of pushing for answers, his family said they were satisfied with the conclusion and that it helped to bring them some semblance of closure. Number 2. Kelly Berg Dove. While working third shift at a gas station in Harrisonburg, Virginia one night in 1982, 20-year-old Kelly Berg Dove dialed 911 and reported that she was receiving obscene phone calls. She asked the police to check on her, but they still hadn't arrived when she called 911 a second time at 2:30 in the morning and said that a male customer who drove up to the station in a silver Ford was harassing her. Kelly mentioned that he had been in the store earlier and that he was improperly dressed. She also said that she had received another inappropriate phone call right after he pulled into the parking lot the second time, leading her to suspect that he had something to do with the harassing calls. By that point, Kelly sounded noticeably panicked. Police arrived at her workplace 2 minutes later, only to discover that she had vanished seemingly into thin air. There were no signs of a struggle, but her purse had been left behind. The young woman hasn't been seen since, and no arrests were ever made, leaving her family without answers for 40 years and counting. Shortly after Kelly disappeared, a sketch artist created a composite drawing of a man who was wanted in the area for indecent exposure. But detectives also avoided getting tunnel vision since they lacked any concrete reason to zero in on the unidentified man or to rule out other possible suspects. A lot of people criticized the police for failing to report to the scene sooner, but what's done is done, and they unfortunately can't go back in time and handle the situation differently. At this point, Kelly's loved ones understand that she's probably not alive. In fact, she was declared legally dead in 1989, 7 years after she went missing. But they still want to know what happened to her and who's responsible, and if they're still alive, for that person to be brought to justice. Investigators reopened the case in 2020, but as time passes and people grow old, the likelihood of speaking to someone with valuable information decreases. Law enforcement admitted that they're racing against the clock to solve the case, and they encouraged members of the public to come forward if they believed they might be able to help. Authorities also asked for help identifying the man in the composite sketch, who they've narrowed down as their main person of interest. There are currently no other suspects in the case. Number 1. Susan Giovaniello. After finishing the graveyard shift as an EMT in Long Island, New York one morning in April 2023, 19-year-old Susan Giovaniello returned to her home in Glen Cove. Shortly after arriving, she suddenly collapsed. Her fellow paramedics rushed to the scene and tried to save her, but they were unable to revive the young woman. Susan's friends, family, and co-workers were both devastated and mystified by her death. After all, healthy 19-year-olds don't typically collapse and die out of nowhere. While it's clear that Susan suffered some sort of medical emergency, her death was still under investigation according to the most recent updates. Local authorities have classified the incident as a line-of-duty death. Regardless of what ripped Susan's life out from beneath her at such a young age, her loss has left a void in the lives of those who knew and worked with her.
"12. Evan Lambert. In early 2023, a train carrying toxic chemicals derailed outside East Palestine, Ohio, near the state's border with Pennsylvania. Nearby residents were evacuated, while experts carried out a controlled burn of the hazardous materials and ensured that the environment was safe for people to return to. About a week later, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine held a news conference to provide the public with the latest updates about the situation. During the event, news cameras caught footage of police asking news station reporter Evan Lambert to stop broadcasting, and while he appeared to comply, he was arrested just moments later. In the video, 2 officers could be seen taking Lambert to the floor and holding him face down while they handcuffed him. One of the officers instructed the anchor to lay flat right before a bystander said, "You guys, he's a national correspondent, you cannot do this." But they did, and shortly after, Lambert asked the police to loosen his handcuffs because they hurt his wrists. They then escorted him to a law enforcement SUV. Before getting into the vehicle, Lambert could be heard saying, "It is literally my job to be there." Bystanders asked the police why they were arresting the reporter, but they didn't appear to respond. When a news anchor asked Lambert if he had anything to say, he said it's tough to do your job in America in 2023. Then an officer closed the SUV door and the vehicle drove off. The exact reasons for the arrest weren't immediately clear. Lambert was accused of being too loud during the report, but a News Nation correspondent told Inside Edition that Lambert was arrested after he cooperated with orders to stop reporting. According to a statement that the Columbiana County Sheriff's Office issued to USA Today, Lambert was charged with misdemeanor disorderly conduct and criminal trespassing. Just days later, Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost announced that the state was dropping the charges due to a lack of supporting evidence. Yost further explained that in some situations, journalists can be arrested for criminal trespassing, but after reviewing the video and other evidence, he determined that the incident involving Lambert didn't qualify. He said that Lambert was lawfully present and that his behavior was consistent with the purpose of the event and his role as a reporter. Governor DeWine also called for the case to be dropped and supported the decision to dismiss the charges. 11. Anderson Cooper's Giggle Fit. Back in 2012, Anderson Cooper was tasked with reporting on Dingus Day, a Polish holiday that isn't a big deal in most of the United States with the exception of a few cities. He focused on Buffalo, New York, the country's unofficial Dingus Day capital, during his Ridiculous segment. As he discussed how the Buffalonians flock to celebrations where girls chase after and hit boys with pussy willow branches, he began to laugh uncontrollably. Cooper erupted into a seemingly endless giggle fit as he struggled to regain his composure. In between laughs, he managed to utter the words, "It's so stupid. It's really so stupid." He was referring to his inability to stop laughing, but some viewers, from Buffalo of course, mistakenly thought the anchor was calling Dingus Day stupid, and they were more than a little offended by it. So much so, in fact, that Cooper ended up apologizing for his words via Twitter, where he clarified that he was describing his giggle fit as stupid, not the holiday itself. He further wrote that Dingus Day sounds like a fun celebration, and that he's genuinely sorry if he offended anyone. However, Cooper apparently wasn't overly tempted to experience the holiday firsthand, because he turned down an invitation to visit the City of Good Neighbors and join in on the festivities the following year. Upset by the rejection, Buffalo's Dingus Day event organizer, Eddie Dobskowitz, unveiled a huge photo of Cooper wearing a crown at City Hall and named him the first ever Pussy Willow Prince. Dobskowitz also launched a website, partypoopercooper.com, which has since been taken down. But the citizens of Buffalo certainly got their point across, as they always do when something or someone ruffles their feathers. 10. The Balloon Boy Hoax. On October 15, 2009, news stations in and around Fort Collins, Colorado were flooded with reports that the young son of Richard and Mayumi Heen, a little boy named Falcon, was trapped in a homemade helium balloon that looked like a flying saucer. It was a terrifying thought, considering the fact that the balloon reached altitudes as high as 7,000 feet during its 90-minute flight. Local authorities and members of the National Guard chased after the balloon for over an hour, covering a distance of roughly 50 miles. By the time it finally landed 12 miles outside Denver National Airport, law enforcement had received an influx of reports that an object had been seen falling out of the balloon. A ground search ensued, only for police to find the little boy hiding out in the attic of his home later that day. As it turned out, he'd been there the entire time. Later that evening, a Larry King Live reporter asked Falcon why he was hiding. He responded that he did it because his parents instructed him to, for the show. The little boy's honesty quickly gave rise to widespread suspicions that his parents had planned the entire harrowing ordeal as a hoax. This prompted law enforcement to investigate, after initially saying that they had no reason to believe the incident was an elaborate performance. Investigators concluded that Richard and Mayumi Haynes had staged the incident as a publicity stunt. According to an affidavit, they planned it as far as 2 weeks in advance and coached their children on what lies to tell to reporters and police. You may be wondering, what was their motive? In the words of the affidavit, they did it in order to make the family more marketable for future media interests. Richard pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of attempting to influence a public servant and was ordered to serve 90 days behind bars and pay $36,000 in restitution. Mayumi was sentenced to 20 days of weekend jail as a result. 9. Jacket Gate. On what started out as a normal day in 2017, Australian journalist Amber Sherlock was approached by a colleague who showed her leaked footage of a tense exchange she'd recently gotten into with her co-host Julie Snook. In the clip, Sherlock could be heard ordering Snook to put on a jacket because both the women had worn white that day. She also got snippy with a third female co-host who was also wearing white. The interaction happened off-air but was still caught on video. Shortly after the standoff, the camera went live and all 3 women smiled and delivered their segments as usual, giving off no clues that anything was wrong behind the scenes. By the time Sherlock saw the clip, it had already gone viral. Viewers were shocked by the diva-like meltdown, which they nicknamed Jacket Gate. It was the hottest topic of discussion across the country for several days and even made news headlines overseas, earning itself a spot on Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show in the US. Sherlock told Stella that at first she thought the whole thing was silly. But as she saw herself rise to the status of a viral villain and the hateful comments began to accumulate, she understood how serious the situation had become. She said she wasn't just mortified at her behavior, but devastated, especially when she thought about how the backlash and the negative publicity could affect her family. In Sherlock's words, "I'm only human at the end of the day, and people forget that." She further explained that on the day of the ill-fated exchange, she'd taken her kids to the beach before work. It was stifling hot out, and like any other mum, Sherlock was tired and exasperated by the time her workday began. The fact that she and her 2 co-hosts all wore white was merely a coincidence. But one thing was clear. Someone at the station deliberately leaked the footage, and according to a station spokesperson, the individual was dealt with internally. 8. Julie Chin. While delivering a report about NASA's cancelled Artemis 1 launch for Tulsa-based NBC affiliate KJRH one day in 2022, anchorwoman Julie Chin suddenly began to stutter. She initially tried to continue reading off her teleprompter, but she found herself unable to keep going. A bewildered Chin apologized to her viewers, saying that something was going on with her that morning. She cut her own broadcast short and called on the station's meteorologist, Annie Brown, to go ahead with her report. As Brown began her segment, Chin could be heard apologizing to her co-workers for going off script. When she didn't return to the screen after Brown finished the weather report, viewers knew something serious must have gone wrong for Chin. They would later learn that the ailing anchorwoman had experienced a serious medical emergency, prompting her colleagues to dial 911. She was subsequently rushed to the hospital. Chin explained in a Facebook post after the fact that she was okay, but that the doctor who treated her believed that she'd suffered the beginnings of a stroke, but not a full stroke. She said that she felt fine at the start of the broadcast, but that her condition deteriorated suddenly and rapidly. First, she lost vision in one eye, and then her hand and arm went numb. Thankfully, all Chin's medical tests turned out well, and although she would need some follow-up testing and care, she received a clean bill of health, along with the go-ahead to return to work in a few days. She thanked her colleagues for helping her through the ordeal and getting her the care she needed, and she thanked her viewers who expressed their concerns for her well-being. 7. Savannah Guthrie. Fans of the Today Show were mystified in early 2023 by the unexplained absence of one of the hosts, 58-year-old Hoda Kotb. It would later be revealed that Kotb took time off work due to an unexpected medical scare that her daughter experienced. But people were still wondering what was wrong when Kotb's co-host, 51-year-old Savannah Guthrie, abruptly walked off set in the middle of the show one day, adding another perplexing mystery to the situation. Another co-host on the show, Chanel Jones, later told viewers that Guthrie wasn't feeling well that day, so she took a COVID-19 test. When she left without saying anything, it was because she just found out that the test was positive. So Guthrie rushed home to get some much-needed rest. Despite being vaccinated against COVID-19, it wasn't her first time being positive. In fact, she tested positive twice, in January and May of 2022. During one of her previous bouts of isolation, she reported that she felt like she had a cold, perhaps owing to the mitigating effects of the vaccine. She returned to the show about a week after her most recent diagnosis, and her fans were glad to see her. In the meantime, Kotb returned to the air. She reported that her daughter was doing much better after spending several days in the intensive care unit. 6. Nathan Reeves. In early 2023, 20-year-old podcaster Nathan Reeves interviewed a 22-year-old photographer named Alexi Reyes at a coffee shop in Houston. The pair were sitting with their backs to the establishment's front window and were about to finish the hour-long segment when an SUV barreled through the glass, pushing them both into the counter in front of them. Although podcasts generally come in the form of audio recordings, there just happened to be a video camera rolling that day, and it captured footage of the terrifying incident. As the vehicle slowly reversed away from the building, Reeves and Reyes looked on in what appeared to be complete shock. Thankfully, they managed to narrowly avoid physical injury. After overcoming their initial astonishment, the duo realized that the crash was captured on camera. They watched the footage, which showed their SUV colliding with another vehicle at an intersection before slamming into the cafe, and decided to publish it on social media. Not surprisingly, the footage went viral. In a subsequent interview, Reeves joked about how the incident actually garnered more exposure than he's used to getting as an amateur content creator. It happened during his 5th podcast episode, which features young artists in the Houston area. Reeves chose the coffee shop because he thought it made a nice backdrop, but luck apparently had other things in mind that day, and because of it, he quickly gained hundreds of new YouTube subscribers. The driver was also uninjured, but was ticketed for running a red light. Alyssa Villa, who was driving the vehicle that the SUV hit, told the Washington Post that even though it was her first car crash and police reassured her that it wasn't her fault, she wasn't exactly happy about it being all over the internet. She said that she was also in shock after the ordeal. In addition to the bonus of gaining social media exposure that could help advance his career, Reeves said that he hopes the clip reminds people to pay attention while they're driving, so they don't end up in these types of avoidable crashes. 5. Bizarre broadcast interruption. Andrew Gardner appeared regularly in news broadcasts throughout parts of southern England as an anchor for Southern Television's Independent Television News (ITN) network. During his regular report on November 26, 1977, the picture started to wobble and the audio was replaced by a deep buzzing sound. For the next 6 minutes, a distorted voice delivered a strange message, claiming to be a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command named Vrillon. The signal hijacker mostly talked about how humans have to give up their evil ways and embrace a more peaceful existence, and warned the public that their time to heed the advice was running short. When the rambling was over, the network returned to normal. The transmitter that was used to broadcast the news program was particularly susceptible to being intruded by an overwhelming transmission, but authorities claimed that pulling the interruption off still would have required a lot of technical know-how. Nobody ever came forward and admitted to being responsible for the incident, which remains unsolved to this day. 4. Roxana Vancia. 25-year-old weather reporter Roxana Vancia was delivering a forecast on a Romanian news channel in early 2016 when she began running in place and doing jumping jacks to express her enthusiasm about the nice weather that meteorologists were predicting. However, she got a little too excited, and as she bounced around, her breasts popped right out of her shirt for the whole world to see. It was nothing new for the attractive anchorwoman to appear on air in a skimpy shirt, but it was certainly the first time she'd experienced this type of wardrobe malfunction. In fact, Vancia seemed just as surprised as her viewers likely were, and she also seemed mortified when she finally realized what had happened based on the shocked expressions of her colleagues. But some viewers speculated that the mishap was a deliberate attempt to increase the network's ratings. Either way, it certainly wasn't the first or last time people criticized a reporter for showing too much. 3. Jessica Robb. Canadian news anchor Jessica Robb was in the middle of delivering a live report on CTV's 6 o'clock evening news in early 2023 when she began to appear faint. She looked unsteady on her feet and began to repeat herself. Her speech became slurred and she apologetically told the host, Nariman Issa, that she wasn't feeling well. The station ended her report early and cut to Issa, who reassured viewers that Robb wasn't alone and had the help and support she needed. Later that evening, Robb and CTV tweeted that she was recovering from whatever had happened to her, but the news anchor made her tweets private shortly thereafter. In a statement to the Daily Mail, she said that she experienced a very personal and vulnerable moment on air. The tweet made by CTV stated that Robb felt ill and was feeling better and resting. In her own tweet, Robb wrote that she was feeling okay. She thanked the cameraman for coming to her aid, and she thanked Issa for handling the emergency in a professional manner. Robb also thanked members of the public who expressed their concern for her well-being. It's unclear why she made her tweets private, although she did mention that she received a lot of hatred and harassment, in her words, which were tied to false theories about the reason for the incident. She also clarified that the ordeal was in no way tied to the COVID-19 vaccine. 2. Corey Sidaway. Canadian news watchers became immersed in a deep and divisive debate in 2020. When a viewer criticized Czech anchor Corey Sidaway for dressing in a way that they believed was too revealing. In an email, the anonymous complainer told Sidaway to dress more appropriately, and they signed their name as the Vancouver Island Cleavage Patrol. The rude note contained 2 photos, one which showed a screenshot of Sidaway and a headless image of a woman who was obviously not Sidaway in an extremely low-cut shirt. According to the writer, the photo on the right side of the screen represented what viewers actually see when they watch the anchorwoman segment on TV. Instead of heeding the individual's not-so-subtle suggestion to cover up more, Sidaway posted the disparaging message and photo on Twitter. She called the so-called computer warrior out for trying to reduce women into an outfit or body part, and reassured the public that today's women don't stand for this type of harassment. Sidaway also shared the critical email on Instagram, along with a caption about how this type of treatment unfortunately happens quite often to women who work in the public eye. She classified the message as one of the worst examples of it she'd experienced so far in her own career. While some people definitely agreed with the anonymous individual who complained, an overwhelming number of people rallied behind Sidaway, including fellow news anchors and reporters, as well as members of the public. Afterward, Sidaway thanked her supporters for the flood of encouragement she received and said that it made her feel less alone. 1. John Brown. Let's face it, it's not unusual for someone to get sick of hearing about the Kardashians. But news anchors are expected to uphold a certain level of professionalism, and an Orlando-based reporter named John Brown shocked viewers in 2015 when his frustration over the Kardashians caused him to throw professionalism right out the window. The incident happened during Brown's morning segment on the Fox 35 network, which he started off by saying that he was having a good Friday. He then went on to tell his co-host Amy that he refused to talk about the Kardashians and that she was on her own for the day, saying, "I've had enough Kardashians. I can't take any more Kardashian stories on this show." Afterward, Brown walked off the set and continued ranting off camera, saying to whoever would listen that he was sick of this family and that it's a non-story. Later that day, he posted the video on Facebook, along with an apology and an explanation stating that he lost his mind a bit and that his tantrum was partially in jest. However, he further noted that he felt better after getting it all out. Joanne Maxwell. When 53-year-old Scottish attorney Diarmaid Bruce denied former client Joanne Maxwell access to legal paperwork she requested in 2021, she embarked on a relentless stalking and harassment campaign against him and his employees at the firm's office in Lanarkshire. The disgruntled 34-year-old scratched the lawyer's $150,000 Mercedes-Benz on 2 separate occasions, during one of which she carved a slur into the hood of the car. She caused over $1,200 worth of damage to the vehicle. Maxwell also pelted one of Bruce's colleagues and the man's car with eggs, poured an unknown liquid on a female employee, and shouted obscenities at staff members over a period spanning from January 2021 to March 2022. The law firm eventually got the police involved and she was arrested. Judge Ross McFarlane narrowly spared Maxwell from prison time and instead banned her from contacting the victims or going anywhere near the law office for 10 years. She was also ordered to perform 200 hours of community service. McFarlane told the press that if Maxwell even slightly violates the conditions set forth by the court, she could end up in serious trouble with the law. 7. Emilio Maldonado. A few days before Christmas in 2010, a man named Emilio Maldonado contacted San Antonio real estate agent Janice Tisdale and asked her to show him an upscale property in a remote subdivision that he was interested in. He said that his banker would also be present at the viewing, but when Tisdale arrived at the address, Maldonado was the only person there. Maldonado said his banker couldn't make it, and something made Tisdale feel uneasy, even though she'd met with the client on several prior occasions with no issues. Trusting her gut, the 68-year-old removed her jewelry before exiting her car. She also opened several of the home's doors before going inside, so she would have an escape exit if something bad were to happen. Tisdale's unexplainable feeling of terror only heightened as she gave Maldonado a tour of the house. Her instincts were telling her to run, but the rational part of her mind was fighting the urge. When she couldn't ignore the strange feeling any longer, Tisdale said it was time to go. She went to pick something up off the floor and was hit over the head. Tisdale fell forward and hit her forehead against a stone wall. Her client had hit her with the tool used by truck drivers called a tire thumper, which he'd been carrying inside his boot. Instead of reacting with fear, Tisdale demanded to know why Maldonado hit her. He told her he needed $4,000 and held her hostage for nearly an hour. Luckily, Tisdale had previously worked as a flight attendant and was trained on how to act in this type of situation. She eventually convinced Maldonado to grab a piece of paper from his truck and fled the scene on foot. Maldonado ran after her, but she managed to flag down some teens who were driving around. They quickly came to her aid and got her to safety. Speaking with 2020 from prison, where he's serving a 60-year sentence for aggravated robbery, Maldonado said he had drugs in his system when he committed the crime. 6. Dale Holloway. Public defender Michael Davidow was talking with an incarcerated client, 37-year-old Dale Holloway, at a New Hampshire jail in 2019, when a guard overheard the customary knock indicating that the meeting was over. But when he looked into the room, he saw blood dripping from Davidoff's face as the lawyer cupped his hands over an injury. Davidoff was hospitalized in the intensive care unit and spent months recovering. He later told the Associated Press that his client was upset because his firm was representing the defendant accused of killing the inmate's stepfather. Holloway brutally attacked Davidoff, causing the victim to fear for his life. No guards overheard the assault as Holloway repeatedly struck his lawyer in the face and head, leaving him with a broken nose, a brain bleed, memory loss, and other injuries. Authorities charged Holloway with attempted murder. In court, the prosecutor pointed out the defendant's history of violence and argued for the maximum sentence, while Holloway's attorney argued that her client was traumatized from a difficult upbringing and saw Davidoff as a threat to him and his family when the attack occurred. Holloway pleaded guilty to a reduced assault charge and received a 7.5 to 15-year prison sentence. He's also facing an attempted murder charge for an unrelated shooting that happened prior to the attack on Davidoff. The trial is currently delayed due to concerns regarding his mental health. 5. Zvi Oswang. During a routine visit at the home of a young man named Zvi Oswang in Boca Raton, Florida in 2022, a mental health therapist noticed that her client kept coming in and out of the room and that none of the other household members seemed to be home. Oswang got a little too close for comfort, so she decided to leave. When she got to the front door, she noticed a black material covering the window, which hadn't been there when she entered the home. Oswang allegedly grabbed the woman from behind in a bear hug and bound her hands behind her back. He put her phone on airplane mode and held her captive overnight, during which time he repeatedly hit her and did other horrific and unthinkable things. The therapist pleaded with the suspect to free her, but he refused to let her go. At times, she worried that her client was going to kill her, but she used her mental health training to defuse the situation as much as possible. Police tracked down the victim's whereabouts the next day after finding out that nobody had heard from her since before Oswang's appointment. Nobody answered the door, but when officers knocked on a window, they heard a scream from inside, so they forced their way in. They found the victim being held at knife point inside a bedroom closet. When the suspect refused to drop the knife, an officer shot him in the head. He survived his injuries and faces 6 felonies, including attempted first-degree murder with a weapon, kidnapping, and 4 counts of battery. 4. Dustin Holdren. Real estate agent Lenora Farrington was hosting an open house near Smith Mountain Lake, Virginia in 2020, when a man later identified as Dustin Holdren walked in and acted interested in the property. He put his information down on the sign-in sheet and they engaged in some friendly chatter about his job and children. Holden left at some point and returned when the house was empty. For reasons that were never explained, he struck Farrington in the head repeatedly with a crescent wrench while she fought for her life. Using her second-degree black belt skills, Farrington fought for her life. She managed to kick the wrench out of Holden's hand, and he allegedly asked her for money and explicit favors. The suspect cleaned out Farrington's purse and fled the scene, at which point she locked the door and dialed 911, grateful to be alive. She was hospitalized for her injuries, but was thankfully expected to recover. Officers located Holden several hours after the assault and took him into custody without incident. According to the Bedford County Sheriff's Office, there was no evidence to indicate any prior connection between the suspect and the victim, and the attack appeared to be random. Records showed that Holden was on parole for previous felony convictions at the time of the attack, including petty larceny, obtaining money by false pretenses, shoplifting, and DUI. During a court hearing regarding the attack on Farrington, a doctor testified that the victim's injuries are not normally survivable. 3. Lester Ralph Jones. 34-year-old single mother of 3 Paige Bergfeld left her children with their nanny at her home in Colorado one day in 2007 and never returned. During the investigation into her disappearance, detectives discovered that she was living a double life and moonlighting as an escort to make ends meet, something her loved ones were totally unaware about until that point. After failing to find incriminating evidence against either of Bergfeld's ex-husbands, investigators put the men on the back burner as potential suspects. They focused on her professional life and discovered that the last known person to interact with Bergfeld was a man named Lester Jones, who'd contacted her to inquire about her services. Police believe Jones might have been the last person to see Bergfeld alive, and their suspicions grew when her car was found on fire 3 days after she vanished, and canines identified his scent at the scene. Jones denied having any contact with Bergfeld, even after officers discovered a track phone that had been in contact with her number during a search. Authorities became increasingly convinced that Jones killed Bergfeld, but without a body or more concrete evidence linking him to the case, charging him wasn't an option. A hiker discovered Paige's skeletal remains in 2012, 5 years after she went missing. It was too late to determine how she was killed, but it appeared as though someone had bound her, and it was clear that she had met a violent end. Jones was charged with murder, but continued to maintain his innocence. In court, his attorney pointed the finger at Bergfeld's other clients, who they claimed could have been the killer, and reminded the jury that the evidence was purely circumstantial. The first trial ended in a hung jury, even after Jones's ex-wife testified to his violent tendencies and recalled being kidnapped by him years earlier. Finally, in 2016, 9 years after Bergfeld's disappearance, Jones was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, felony murder, and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2. Neil Rice. When a successful young marketing professional named Neil Rice found himself feeling lonely and wishing he could be with the woman who didn't return his feelings, he entered a psychic shop in Manhattan looking for answers to his emptiness and sadness. He paid the psychic, named Brandy, $2,500 for a reading. After deciding that Brandy wasn't the right spiritual provider for his needs, Rice began going to 26-year-old Priscilla Kelly Delmaro in Times Square. The meeting happened in 2013 and was the first of many that would happen over the next 20 months. Rice had no history of going to psychics or falling for scams, but now he was doing both, and the costs of getting the universe to turn in his favor quickly stacked up. When things in his life failed to take a positive turn as predicted by Delmaro, she blamed bad energy and said she needed money for materials and rituals. At one point, she told Rice she needed money for a time machine, but accepted a $30,000 Rolex instead. Rice grew to believe that if he didn't fork over cash when Delmaro requested it, bad things would happen to him. Even after the woman he desperately wanted to be with passed away, Delmaro convinced him that bad spirits killed her and offered to reincarnate the woman, for a price, of course. By then, Rice had dropped nearly $400,000 on her services, including $90,000 to build a golden bridge to another dimension, where Delmaro would use her gifts to ward off yet another evil spirit. Between what he spent on the first psychic, Brandy, and Delmaro, Rice was ultimately swindled out of more than $700,000, leaving him penniless, at which point he finally snapped out of his funk and realized the sheer lunacy of the situation. Many people know that psychics run a business that largely profits from people's need for hope, answers, reassurance, and other things that the future can't truly promise us, and plenty of psychics readily admit this off the record. Unfortunately, when Rice most likely needed mental health treatment, he turned to a fortune teller. Delmar was arrested for defrauding Rice and pleaded guilty to 1 count of grand larceny. She served 8 months in jail, followed by 4 years of probation. In addition to feeling like her sentence was a mere slap on the wrist, Rice was told that he'll probably never get any of his money back. 1. Taylor Schabusiness. In early 2022, 24-year-old Taylor Schabusiness allegedly murdered, decapitated, and dismembered a lover named Chad Tharion. The 25-year-old victim's mother found some of his remains strewn across the basement of the family's Green Bay, Wisconsin home. After learning that Schabusiness was the last person seen with Tharion, police tracked her down and immediately noticed blood on her clothing. they found more of Thyrion's body parts in her van. When officers asked Shah Business about what happened, she replied, "That is a good question," and showed other signs of being mentally unsound. According to court documents, Shah Business admitted to using methamphetamine with the victim before the crime. She told investigators that she snapped and blacked out and didn't remember the violent episode. Not surprisingly, the young woman's mental competency has landed at the center of court hearings regarding the murder charge and other crimes she faces in connection with the gruesome slaying. During a competency hearing in early 2023, Shah Business's lawyer, Quinn Jolly, asked the judge to reschedule the session because an expert witness he planned to have testify was unable to make it to court that day. Something about the request apparently set Shah Business off. She charged at Jolly and elbowed him in the head and had to be subdued by court officers. The judge found Shah Business competent to stand trial and granted Jolly's request to withdraw from the case. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be known among business owners of all types throughout your area as a notoriously difficult client who's impossible to satisfy, or lose most of your savings to a greedy psychic during a particularly vulnerable time in your life? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.